Right, ladies and gentlemen, I will call this meeting to order. Before we get to the adoption of the agenda, we do want to introduce a new addition to the town of Edson. So I'd like to hand things over to Mr. Kitlitz. Go ahead, Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great pleasure that I introduce you to Kundi Birak, who is our new Economic Development Officer. Started with us on 4th of April, is how we start? Yeah. So it's his third weekend. So we're very happy to have him here. And there's only places to go is up with our economic development portfolio. So we're excited to hear that. So.
Welcome, Kundi, and we're very excited to have you on board. All right, so can I get a motion, please, that we accept the agenda for the April 12th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting to be adopted as presented. Councillor Sherrill make that motion. All those in favor? Motion carried. Can I get a motion that the minutes of the March 8th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as presented? Councillor Moore will make that motion. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried. And we will move on. We have no delegations this evening. We do have reports from staff, executive office. The West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority Agreement presented by Christine Beveridge, our CAO. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As council is aware, over the past several months, the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority governance model has been under review. With the impending retirement of the current management consultant, there's been a need to look at alternate options. The regional CAOs for Yellowhead County, Jasper, Hinton, and Edson have been working to find a solution that would provide the best oversight in relation to the governance and financial matters to the authority. To that end, we've reviewed the current agreement with the authority and have made revisions such as clearly defining the duties of each authority partner, how new partners are introduced into how the authority is settled, the financial obligations and processes of the authority, the need for an administrative head for the authority, as well as general operations. It was also recognized that a management agreement would be pertinent in order to move forward. The agreement establishes the role of the managing partner, covers such items as duties, payment, termination, as well as dispute resolution processes. The managing partner would be overseeing the management and administrative services for the authority's operations. These services were formerly provided by the town of Hinton. However, there was no formal agreement. Yellowhead County has agreed to assume this role, and the takeover would commence May 1st. And the consultant that has been involved has agreed to stay on a little bit longer as well to help with the transition. It's important to note that the authority has approved both agreements as presented, and that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
All right, thank you, CEO Beveridge. And as the council representative on this committee, along with Councillor Kosichny, this is a very exciting time, I think, for this organization. We do appreciate the work Hinton has done over the years, but there is a desire for some changes. And I really appreciate Yellow County stepping forward. It was great to see all this come together with all the partners. And I think the group is very excited to be moving in this direction. So we'll open the floor to questions if anybody has any questions or concerns. And I do believe we have chatted about this previously. So with that, if there's no questions, I guess that's a quick and easy one for you.
We'll be bringing this forward for approval during our next meeting on April 19th.
All right, thank you. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, through the chair, just wondering, have any other municipalities voiced any concerns or changes up until this point in terms of that?
So today was actually a day that Hinton was bringing forward, as well as Yellowhead County. I have not heard that there were any issues with the current agreements as they stand.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We will move on to our next item then, if you can get Councillor Schnarr, please. Ian, if you want to come up, might as well come down.
And he went outside.
I can't figure out code.
You go next time.
Thank you, Councilor Shenard. We're gonna move on to our second item, the draft Town of Edson Strategic Plan 2022 to 2025. We'll hand things over to Ms. Beveridge first, and welcome to Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm pleased to provide council with the draft 2022 to 2025 strategic plan that was created from our strategic planning session held on February 10th and 11th that both council and administration attended. Tonight we have Ian McCormick with his strategic steps joining us with us to go over the draft and offer any allow the opportunity for council to ask any questions with regards to that. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's nice to be back with you again in your location this time. I was saying to your CAO a little while ago that we'd initially intended to be out here, I think some months prior, but the weather conspired against us. So it's nice to be able to make a trek this time to actually come and see you. I suppose it's only fair too, since you came to see us last time when we worked in Edmonton. With me tonight is Ben Prue, who behind me, who is the Business Development Manager for Strategic Steps. He comes out from time to time to see who's who. The other person who's joined us is Jackie Hansen, who was part of our workshop as well. Jackie is joining us. I was joking with somebody from the Strategic Steps office in Parksville, BC at the moment. So trying to convince her. She said to me this morning that she can only afford a shack, unfortunately, on Vancouver Island.
I know expensive those shacks are.
Kind of expensive shacks, yes.
Well, if you would have let us know, we would have went down there.
There could be another plan, an update in a year, Mr. Mayor, whatever works for you. I want to respect your time, and I think you have had a bit of a chance to have a look through this. So I thought what I might do is just walk you through some of how we've got to where we get to. First of all, the plan draft that you see in front of you has no layout associated with it and has no performance measures associated with it yet. We wanted to make sure that we heard you properly during the strategic planning session and that we had provided heard the correct goals before we thought we would have administer measures to those. But that will come next if council is in accordance with this. We started at the top and we worked our way down as part of this strategic plan. We started with vision and mission and goals. So you had said in terms of what success looks like for you as a community, that Edson is a safe and welcoming community, a vibrant town and an ideal location that draws people together through culture, recreation, hard work, pride, and opportunity. And to get from here to where that ideal future state is, that's where the mission comes from. And you had said for that location is our advantage, diversity our strength, people are our power. Edson provides opportunities for all who love life in a place where community comes together. And then with that, you developed a series of values or the lens through which council would make decisions on behalf of the community. You had given us a series of 6. So you said adaptability, a focus on results, inclusivity, pride, service excellence, and transparency. Attached to that, we added definitions based on what we heard. These aren't the Webster's dictionary definitions. This is trying to interpret what you provided to us during the session. So absolutely, we're open to your comments on that as much as we're open to comments on anything else. Following that, I'm going to skip priorities for now, if I might, because we'll get to that just in the body of the plan. But the whole idea behind priorities is what's important and what's timely for 2022 or 2023 if there are budget implications to it, for example. So you came up with a list of 5 of those things. The bulk of the rest of the plan, which starts on page 4 of the plan, I'm not sure what page of your PDF, is actually a series of what we call 5 pillars. You won't recognize those because what we had done is when you had created a series of goals or strategies and tactics, we looked for thematic similarities. And those were the things we brought together into these 5 larger areas. So they are kind of almost a table of contents, if you like. So the 5 of them were about creating a connected community that's safe and inclusive, robust, adaptable economy, responding to a changing global environment, ensuring quality infrastructure, and providing effective leadership and community engagement. We put the pillar of leadership and community engagement at the end because the people in this room and in this building and providing effort on behalf of the town to the people and businesses who live here are supporting what's here. So we put the support piece at the end. You're really here to deliver some of those first pieces. Below the level of pillars then, we identified a series of goals. These are similar to some of the goals that you had come up with during the session, but much like the pillars, we pulled some things together. So you didn't have a list of 30 goals, for example. So the goals answer the question for council and for the municipality. What's different about this community 4 years from now than it is right now? Or at least what has been started over that time. So it answers the question, what? Below, and that's the governance, those are the governance questions. Below that level are a series of bulleted points. These are tactics or strategies or action items. And these answer the question about how. How do we achieve some of those things that are in the goal? Now, these are perhaps and probably more likely to appear in a corporate business plan than they are in a strategic plan. However, it's completely up to you. And when we provide these to councils, some councils choose to include them in their business plan and some don't. And the reason they don't is because council is interested in the what, and they've hired experts to figure out the how. So you don't necessarily want to bind those experts. Some of the ideas that are in here are probably really good ideas. Some things might come up that are even better ideas. Some of these might not work. That, however, is completely up to council. If, however, these don't show up in, say, a public-facing strategic plan, they certainly would be included in the first level of a corporate business plan, in amongst all the other stuff that the town does as well. So I'll leave that with you. So within each of these pillars are a series of 3 or 4 goals, 3 or 4 major things that you want to see different in your community between now and at least started between now and 2025, so over the 4 years. And each one of those then in turn is supported by a strategy, series of strategies. It's those strategies, however, that you may recall, we spent some time going through and identifying kind of what was the highest priority, what's important and what's timely. Those were some of the pieces that we identified there, which now calls back to that list of priorities that is in the strategic plan as well. So, Mr. Mayor, with respect for your time, I could certainly go through all of these, but I'm certainly interested in what council has to say. You will see another version of this with any kind of upgrades that council or members of your administration choose to provide. I should say too that administration has had a look at this already before it has come to council. So this is kind of version 2 of the strategic plan, because your administration has already had a bit of a provide some insight into it too. So Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you for that.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick and the rest of your team. All right, council, do you have anything you would like to add? Anything that you see there that doesn't align with what we talked about at strat planning here a few months ago? I reviewed the document and I think it encapsulates, I think, what we've talked about and really focused on the themes that we saw during those discussions. And I look forward to certainly seeing the finalized copy of this. Councillor Taylor?
Yes, through the chair. When you say like things like affordable attainable housing, is transitional housing then included in that? Is that the way you describe that? Is that the idea?
So, Mr. Mayor, the idea behind housing is a full spectrum, right? From shelters to home ownership. So the transitional piece would be early on in that, probably before affordable and attainable housing, because we could certainly add it, but the idea was ultimately
I was assuming I was assuming it was included in that statement. It's one term that we continually bring up, and it doesn't have to be specifically said, as long as it's alluded to, we can gravitate to that.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Councillor Byer.
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair to Mr. McCormick. When you mentioned the benchmarking part of it, so I'm just wanting some clarity on what part are we benchmarking? If some councils choose not to put the strategies in their plan, in my mind, we measure we benchmark maybe the goal, I believe, is that right? Okay, and then whether or not so is that like a yes, or how do we create that? Because they're all very different.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. So we do measure typically on goals, and those are typically outcome measures. So sometimes they're softer. So citizen satisfaction, it's not the number of business licenses, for example. However, the higher level goal statement or measure statement will often be a judgment call based on the strategies below it, which in many ways can be measured in an objective sense. So that's typically how it does. We try and put a mix of hard and soft measures in, But for outcomes, it's often hard we can proxy hard measures, but not permanently. And you may recall one of the early things we did when we got together for our workshop was we looked back at your last plan and said, was this delivered? Yes, no, or maybe, or partially? That's essentially the same way it would happen here too. I suspect that for any one of these goals, on balance, it will be delivered, but there will be pieces of it which may require a little bit of extra effort, or something comes along which gets in the way of what you thought you were going to be able to do. If that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Sharp?
Yes, through the chair, reading through it, yes, you did sum up what we talked about. I like the way it's laid out, and part of the thing is where we have all this great plan until certain things like finances get in the way. So, but I mean, you did spell it out. I do like the way you summarized it. It is some very good goals. Some of them can be more difficult to achieve, but what's in front of us, I believe what we talked about for that 2 days of tolerating me, but you did impress me, but it's here, and I just hope like we can do 50% of that goal. We've accomplished lots because every one of them sounds good. Finances get in the way and it doesn't work.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No strategy survives first contact with reality, right?
Yeah.
However, that doesn't let you abdicate your responsibility to plan thoughtfully. The other piece is this is about change. And if a strategic plan isn't about change, it's not really strategic. So looking back at this 4 years hence, my anticipation is that not all these things are delivered, that something happened that got in the way, some other opportunities came up. And so when we had suggested that you do a regular review of this, that you look at your high priorities, say 3 times a year, and if you evaluate your priorities once a year, at least you have the baseline to measure from, that you can look at progress and you can celebrate what happened, what the success that the community has had. So that's one of the reasons we do try and make these things at least somewhat aspirational and difficult to achieve. We don't want to make life too easy on your CAO, for example.
Definitely not.
No. And Jackie, who's online here, like to comment too about tolerating you for a couple of days. So thank you.
Probably about 23 degrees in Parksville today.
Oh, no, it's about 6 degrees and rainy. It snowed on Sunday. So yeah, you're not missing anything over here. But it was a pleasure working with you guys.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Barr?
To the chair, to, I guess, council and administration. I had zoomed in on the strat planning. Couldn't hear all the conversation, I'll admit. Definitely some highlights. So I'm really pleased to see a lot of the asset management planning kind of listed in a few different ways, along with a few other things, because I feel that was something that we just didn't really get a good handle on once COVID hit. So yeah, I'm really pleased with this, and providing this is what everybody else mentioned while I couldn't hear them all. The other corners of the room, I'm very happy to go ahead with the next step with this.
All right, Councillor Taylor.
Through the chair to council and admin, I'm really excited about this plan too. Finally, 6 months in, it feels like we'll have focus from this council, not always gravitating to the last strategic plan, which is great. Also within this plan, it's great to see the personalities of the 7 council members within this plan. We each bring something or bring some similar ideas to the plan, but sometimes just individual ideas that still got to put in here that want to be accomplished as a group. And I think working towards those goals is going to be an exciting challenge for everybody. And the only the question I have, and this sort of came up with strat planning, is that Mr. McCarthy, you talked about building a plan so we're at 100%. And Mr. Kidlet's brought up, we'll create a plan at 85% or 90% because we never know what's going to happen. And this last 4 years has proven just that. So I sort of look at our admin, and you are satisfied with this plan. This is not an overworked plan at all.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Taylor. So in evaluating this plan when it came forward, it wasn't, sometimes these plans can be so grandiose and visionary that they're really not achievable. And so when we look at this, really where the focus areas are that we've heard, now we know where council, the priorities are. It really helps us set our plans and for plans forward. So in our view, this is not easy, as Ian mentioned, that if it was so easy, we wouldn't have anything to strive for. But most definitely, it's something that we appreciated being a part of the process, to be able to build this plan with council. And I think that we, as a whole, from administration, feel that this is a plan that we could really stand behind and be able to set our work plans towards it.
Excellent. I'm excited to get to work on this.
With that, I just want to once again thank you, Ian and Jackie, who put up with us for a couple days. And your colleague in the back there, he didn't have the chance to join us, but it was I think you heard from council at that session that it was a very worthwhile exercise. A lot of times these things are things that are not very enjoyable and really seem like a waste of time, and that was not the case. And I think that speaks to your professionalism and your experience, and we really look forward to this moving forward. Do you have a timeline in terms of when we'll get a finalized kind of document that we can look at passing as a council?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, we'll have to fit your council schedule, of course, because it has to come to a council meeting. But probably, if you have suggested very little in the way of changes, working with your CAO, probably a couple of weeks.
All right, sounds good. Well, with that, thank you very much for making the trip out. You're welcome to stay if you like. Or if you would like to, I don't know if you're staying the night or not.
No, Mr. Mayor, we came out specifically for this, and we will trek our way back to back home again.
Well, as you know, we are a safe community, so we do have photo radar. So I'm just going to say 50 kilometers an hour over top of the overpass.
Thank you.
After that point, I don't care how fast. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
But if you do speak,
Hey.
Ian,
Yes, the revenue for that.
Yeah.
It's a voluntary tax.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I just wanted to thank you all. Again, it really was a pleasure to work with Mayor and Council and admin. And I know it's hard to learn and hear when you're online, but we really appreciate all the feedback that we got, because we were able to incorporate all of that into this plan. And I'm really glad to hear that you can see yourselves in this plan. That makes me very proud. So appreciate all of your time.
All right, enjoy Parksville.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a good night. All right, we are going to move into our corporate services. So before we get into our public portion of our budget discussion, I know administration wants to go into a closed session to discuss a few items. So can I get a motion, please, that the meeting move into a closed session pursuant to section 24 of the Freedom of Information and Protection Privacy Act? Councilor Byron will make that motion. All those in favor? Motion carried. All right. Thank you for that. We are moving into the final operating budget presentation. Sarah Bittner.
So Mr. Mayor, I'll be called just to introduce this item.
Sure, go ahead.
So tonight, we're introducing the final 2022 budget for council's review and consideration. In November, we recommended that an interim operating budget be passed to allow administration time to bring back an enhanced budget. I chose those words carefully, just as I do today. What was meant was a budget that was carefully pulled together and carefully assessed. This budget is about focus and it's about priorities. There's now been time for council to determine its priorities. The strategic plan, in which we reviewed earlier in this meeting, the priorities were itemized as long-term solutions towards homelessness and mental health. The multiplex, infrastructure needs to be prioritized and plans created, and relationship building. Key members of senior administration have now settled into their positions and have an understanding of their departments. The fees and charges bylaw was part of our process to be reviewed. We were able to do a partial review. We didn't get as far as anticipated, but we'll continue to advance towards further improvements or further enhancements for the 2023 budget. We now have certainty in our government transfers, and we also understand what our assessment is. Unfortunately, we saw little to no growth in that area. We also reviewed the expenses to ensure what was in the budget was necessary. Through those expenses, there's also noted items that are out of the control of the municipalities, notably electricity, policing, and inflation. With this budget, we want to speak about some of the notable highlights. So the strengthening the community's future by adding a focus to our economic development portfolio, by adding focus towards land use bylaw rewrite, which will not only benefit the residents, but the businesses to help simplify the processes, making the transactions more easily and less red tape. This also helps our staff in interpreting this bylaw and helping work through, and that in itself will also help with our residents in the timing that it takes to issue permits. Preventative maintenance on facilities to add future leaders to the lifespan of the facilities. This investment in our assets is very important. We also have the increased focus on infrastructure, the planning of and repair. And we're also reducing our reliance on reserves. This council made it a priority to look into this and to work towards a strategy. This will take us time to recover from, but we have taken a step ahead with this budget. This is a high level, this is simply a high level introduction, and a more detailed presentation will be presented by our GM of Corporate Services, Sarah Bittner, and she'll walk council through along with the support of the two GMs that are here as well. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah Beveridge. I'll just bring the presentation up on the screen. Good evening, Council. I'm presenting to you tonight the 2022 final operating budget. As you know, the interim budget was passed on November 25th of 2021. At that stage, there was a proposed taxation increase of 4.9. At that time, that included 0.06% for COVID recovery. So therefore, that equates to around 4.84% municipally without the COVID recovery. Presented tonight to you as a final operating budget with a 4.52% increase. This, however, includes 1.9% of COVID recovery. So really equates to around a 2.62% for municipal taxes. So an overall decrease from interim to final of 0.38%. I did look at some comparisons with some neighbouring municipalities. As you see on the screen, Drayton Valley projecting a 2.5, Whitecourt around a 2.6, and Rocky Mountain is holding with a 0 this year. Some comparisons there. I thought I'd do a little quick recap of some of the items that are included in the interim budget. It was a little while ago now. So just to sort of remind council some of those areas and items that were added within the interim budget. This page shows you the ones that had no taxation impacts. The next slide, I can get into the ones that did. So these are some items that we had added into the budget. As you can see, I've got the amounts and also what were funded by, which is why they have no impact on the taxation. So we added the household hazardous waste program. We have allocated $100,000 to economic development contracted services for the start of our economic development program. We had land use bylaw term position, and of course the land use bylaw project itself. At that stage, we had the council chambers AV upgrade added, some bridge inspections, a cemetery site plan, and also the playground zone speed signage. So they're all things that were added in and included within the interim budget. On the revenue side, we'd added $150,000 of revenue from grey water sales, as well as the increase to water and sewer asset management program reserves, which is that yearly amount that we add to the utility rates. And there was also an item that for sidewalk maintenance that was originally included within the operational budget, and we have moved that to the capital budget as discussed with council. So that was just a quick recap there on some of the items that sort of refresher of some of the interim budget items. So what makes up our 4.52? So before we start, just every year we're always asking what does 1% of taxation get us? This year it's $114,000.
114. Wow.
Like a wow, or is that wow, like, wow?
It's like, well, it used to be 102, so we're up to 114. Next week, yeah.
So the chart on the left there is showing where we were at the interim budget stage. The obligations that we had for electricity and policing and photo radar, the wages and benefits from the collective agreement, and the other obligations like insurance and contracts, etc. One thing I should have said that this slide here is slightly changed from the one in your package there. I've added the dollar values as well beside them, just so you can instead of just the percentages. Then we had, this is where the decreased subsidizations ended up at the 0.06. A lot of the items that we included at interim at the bottom of that chart, we ended up funding them from the energy reserve. So that put it back into another area where we had to start decreasing our reliance on reserves. So also included at interim, as we just mentioned, that did have an impact on the taxation was our increasing of cybersecurity and also our 24-hour IT support and security, asset management GIS license. We gave building maintenance some tools and some money for some preventative maintenance that was mentioned. And at that stage, we had the public health facilities rent revenue transfer as well. So that's where we got to the 4.9 on the chart on the left. So on the right, these are the changes that bring us to the 4.52. Electricity again came up. We had done an estimate for the interim budget. However, it was higher than anticipated due to the distribution charges being higher than we had thought. So we're looking at those two, really, it's over $200,000 just for electricity from 2021 to now.
So basically just electricity alone is 2% increase to our budget.
Natural gas came in a little bit lower and insurance did also. In the personnel, the adjustments to salaries and wages. Some other budget amendments there. These are also just summarized. We'll go into more detail in the coming slides onto some of these items as well. So just showing you there the budget amendments for landfill, our utilities, the Edson Senior Transport, Woolmore Park, cost sharing, and then just some other expenses and revenues as well. And then as far as our reserves transfers going, we're looking at, and we'll discuss this again a little bit later, the revenue sharing operational contribution for policing and general. We looked at the public health facilities rent revenue transfer. It's a mouthful. And just decided that the risk of that really wasn't warranted having that needing to be transferred this year. The good part about this is the COVID recovery. You can see there we've actually removed our reliance on all of the energy reserve within this final budget. So we've started down the road for that COVID recovery and our reliance on reserves. So I can, any questions on that? Let's go into a bit of detail on on some of those later on. Any questions at this stage?
I'd just like to say once again, 2% for just electricity.
Yes.
Adrian, you got that? 2%
For electricity.
for electricity. That is crazy. Okay. So before you go further into your presentation, I have to say I'm impressed with the work you guys have done, considering 2% in electricity alone, not to mention all those other areas. So
How much was power?
2%.
Thank you. I'll move on.
You can't laugh, then you're just gonna cry.
So now we're going to a little more detail on some of the items that were listed in the summary there. So for landfill, we have a net taxation impact of a decrease of 27,400. I say excluding electricity and insurance because we've shown that as a whole on that other line item. Otherwise, I'd be going through little bits and pieces for every department, so it just made it a little bit more simpler. So talking about the landfill revenue, there's actually been a net decrease in the budgeting of revenue of $50,000. This is brought by two different factors. The fee increases that we looked at and brought to the committee for the fee increase for the fees bylaw, they have been applied into this budget. However, there is an expected decrease in the waste that is going to be brought into the landfill. So because of that expected decrease in the waste, we have to project there's a net impact of less revenue in total, even though we did apply the increases to the rates. If we had not, we would have had a larger amount here. But conversely to that, it's not all bad news. The landfill expenses also decreased by $67,500. This is due, if there is decreased tonnage being brought into the landfill, it results in the landfill's life increasing, right? And every year we have to make a contribution towards the landfill reclamation, a liability account, to make sure that we have enough money at the expected end of life of the landfill. So what this means is that I've been able to adjust that cost that was in the budget because the life of the landfill is longer, we have a longer amount of time to collect that money. So therefore I was able to decrease that expense. Landfill is a cost shared item. The reclamation line itself is not cost shared with the county. But just due to the decrease in the landfill revenue, and there were a few little adjustments for expenses, the Yellowhead County cost share will have an increase of nearly $18,000 based on that. So any questions on landfill?
Clayton, try to supplement that a little bit. So I think when the interim budget was done, we were using estimates of about, I think it was around 10,000 tons of material coming to the landfill per year based on some of the trends. And then there was sort of this change in some of the materials that were coming to the landfill and that they may not be compliant. So when we went to the fees analysis and looked at things a bit closer, we realized that really we're looking at about half that much material coming to the landfill. And that's why it's decreased. So even with the increase in fees, the amount of material coming we're projecting is a lot less. So if something changes and we can take some of that material again, I think it'll be a good news story, but right now we're not taking that. So it's been a reduction in the amount of product coming in the land.
Okay. So the county doesn't have to cost share for the reclamation, even though or are they accounting for it on their side?
I believe they were accounting for it on their own side. I'm checking with Jeffrey at the county, at my counterpart at the county, just to make sure we're both on the same page with that and using the same calculations.
Yes, that's concerning to me. Okay.
Right. So moving on with utilities, the water and sewer, because we now have the we've worked towards cost recovery for these two items within our budget. We're looking at the taxation impact of zero. It will require some rate adjustments on June 1st. So the water will go from $1.31 to $1.47 for the remainder of 2022. And sewer goes from $1.50 to $1.51 for the remainder of the year. So you can see the total for per cubic meter for those prior to June 1st is $2.81. After June 1st is $2.98. So I did go out and look at some comparisons, some of the areas around us. So Drayton is a little bit higher than us. The Whitewood and Rocky seem fairly similar to us, and then there's Stony Plain as well, which are considerably higher there. So just to give you some comparison on with some of our neighbours.
All right, any questions on that, Councillor Sharp?
How close to charging that are we getting close to cost recovery? Like at the $1.47 going up to like comparison to other towns, but our goal is to get the cost recovery.
Yes, I guess I should clarify that there is cost recovery to a point. We are covering all our operational costs, and there are also some reserve transfers that are included in that. That go to our infrastructure reserve, but also those ones that are going to the asset management program reserve specifically for water and sewer. So that's all included within this. It's not covering all our depreciation or anything like that into the future, but we are covering, as I say, our operations and some reserve transfers with this.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Barr.
Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. So then that would just on that wastewater treatment plant, then you're inferring that the capital, any additional capital funding that we provide to the wastewater treatment plant that isn't included in that cost recovery?
That would be a discussion through when that occurs, how we fund that, how we retrieve that, I can't think of the right word. But yeah, it will be discussion with council at that time. I did also add another slide in for here, just to show our utility bill impact based on what we just spoke about there. We say 20 cubic meters a month is a sort of an average amount. So that's what we use for our comparisons. So for water, for 20 cubes, prior to June 1 would be 26.20 a month, and after that would be 29.40. And then the sewer goes up 20 cents.
Can we go back to the previous slide?
Certainly.
So I had a look at this, and I think that I'm gonna get crucified for saying this, but I think we need to increase our water rates a little bit higher than the $1.47 and make it equal to our sewer rates. I am concerned we are going to have to do a little bit more aggressive stance on drilling for new water wells. We have capacity issues within our current water infrastructure. And in this budget, I would be supportive of bringing our water rates on par. One of the comments that I have always heard is that how is sewage costing us more than our water? And water, if you look in our asset management plan reserve, has way less money in it compared to what we're collecting for sewers. So I think that we need to, when we talk about our asset management plan, when we talk about core municipal services and water being the key portion to that, and understanding that we have lots of water breaks, we have lots of water infrastructure needs, and I'm sure Mr. Kitlitz and Mr. Fisher, as well as our utilities manager Darren, know that we are going to have to spend more and more dealing with our water. So I certainly would be in support of bringing that up to $1.51. I know people are struggling right now, but if we don't start doing this stuff, and our water rates, I'm sorry, are cheaper than most other municipalities out there. This is just a small sample of what you see. Whitecourt's lower, but they're probably subsidizing more. They're also right next door to a nice river where we're a little further away, and we are on well water. So, and a very more complex system. So that's just my thought. I don't know if council has any thoughts on that, but we got to get serious about our asset management plan and our water security as a community, and we're not going to be able to afford to deal with these things if we don't have the rates that reflect our future infrastructure needs. Councillor Byron.
Thanks. Through the chair to council and administration. My question to Ms. Bittner earlier regarding that was kind of along the lines of what Mayor Zahara just said, is the capital projects, if they're not being included, if we are taking them from other methods of funding, then it's not truly reflective. And I know sometimes we like to brag that we're cost recovery, but it's like not all the way, just kind of a certain portion of it is, right? What Mayor Zahara has mentioned about our water, for the past 4 years, we've heard that ongoing that, okay, we have to not use water this week, and because we have to make sure we have firefighting capabilities, and this is constantly coming forward. So I would be supportive of doing that. And maybe just a question to Ms. Bittner. Do you know why Stony Plain is much higher? Is that because maybe they do include their capital projects in that, or did you get any indication why their rates are a little bit higher than the others?
No, I'm not aware. I can find out that though. I was looking back today thinking that would be good to find out for you. So I
Yeah.
definitely will.
Ms. Beveridge?
So, excuse me, with the, it's a hard comparison because we don't have all of the information. So some utility models and many utility models are looking to, create for the capital projects as well, to include that within, and so they're building for their future. I mean, it's always a goal, but sometimes it's not ever, it's not always sustainable. So with those numbers, it's really hard to tell unless we do the review of each individual area to ensure we understand what their utility model is.
Thank you.
Councillor Sharp?
Just kind of comment similar to the mayor, but just looking at it, we are getting more aggressive with water. Water went from 131 to 147, sewer went from 150 to 151. So we are going, so next year, we'd have to look at it, bring it apart, but we did give them a sizable jump on water versus sewer. So we should maybe continue to look at it because water costs are drilling wells, et cetera. I have to agree with that comment. And looking at the other towns, it's a good comparison, but we don't know what their tax base is like either. So we are getting aggressive. So maybe next year we look at a few more cents again on it.
That's the problem, I think, Councillor Sharp, is keep saying, oh, next year.
But we were aggressive, went from one.
Yeah, well, we need to be more aggressive than that. You're talking about 3 or 4 cents per cubic meter, which is not a lot to the average person compared to how much revenue it generates for us. And you are also, and I stress this, you are hitting every single person and every single organization, many of which in our community, such as the provincial government, that do not pay taxes but benefit from all these services that they don't want to pay for. And this is actually higher utility rates will translate into less tax reliance for this infrastructure. You're either going to pay it on the tax side, you're going to pay it on the utility side. Utilities are far more fair because there's so many people and so many properties that do not pay taxes in our community. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if other members of council have any suggestions, but water is such a crucial part of our community, and yeah, there is a sizable increase there, but I think that bringing it to on par, I don't think is totally out of realm of what we should be looking at. Councillor Taylor.
So do we each year look at this individually, or do we have a grid that we look on per year as like we increase it to 147 this year, next year it's at this rate, next year do we have a grid that we work with at that?
It's really based, Councillor Taylor, through the cost for that year. Like this increase here you see in front of you now was due to the increase in electricity. Also with, there was some items where we're always below budget, above budget on some of those. So we've done a little bit of adjustments on those things too. So I take the expenses for the year, the reserve transfers we usually do, and then bring that down to a zero impact on taxation. Water itself, you may not remember from the interim budget, but water itself does have around 230,000 that subsidises our taxes. It's one of those items that we're trying to move to reserves, but to do that you have to add to taxation. Like you can't just move it to the reserve because then you need to create more taxes. So it is one of those areas, but we always try and keep that same amount at the bottom. So we're not increasing that reliance on the taxation. So anything that we add, I'm assuming from the mayor's description, any increase would then go through to reserves.
Yes.
Yes.
That's my whole point is every year you put this off, the less money that we're going to have when we actually have to spend $1 million to deal with our water infrastructure needs in this community. And I much rather have the utilities paying for that and everybody contributing to that than that being on taxation or us having to borrow money, which then of course costs interest and all those sorts of things. So, and when you're making this sort of increase, a couple pennies more is not going to upset the apple cart, so to speak. And will put this community in a far better position down the road. But that's just my perspective. So I'll leave it at that. Councillor Taylor.
I do hear what the Mayor Zahara is saying in terms of sort of building for the future. And I do hear what Ms. Bittner was saying about we have to respond to the needs of the year. But if there was a way to honestly prepare each year, so we know that it's, going up, but having it at least go up. I don't know what it went up in previous years. Did it jump this high in previous years? Or
Through to council, the jump from 131 to 147 is because we have a half a year to catch up. So the final budget is for the entire year, but the rates for the 1st until June have been 131. So to catch up with that, they need to be 147 to be cost recovery for the entire year. That's why there's a little bit of a higher jump than you may usually see.
I see. What, on average, what?
I've seen them go up the last couple of years around 8 cents, 7 to 8 cents each for water and sewer.
So, through the mayor, what about creating some sort of system or that we look at a 9 or 10 cent increase? I don't know. Per year, is that out of the realm of thinking or like, so it's always on, so not doing it every year, you're not looking at it every year, it's already embedded. The public is aware that it will go up. It's not just in response to needs. I don't know what other members of council think of that idea or if that's feasible.
I think it is certainly feasible to do that. It will have to be reviewed every now and then because inflation will catch up with that at some stage, right? But there's definitely an argument for doing that, and then whatever that difference is goes to reserve every year between what that generates and the needs for that particular year.
The other thing I forgot to mention here too is a lot of this increase has to do with the operational costs. We're not factoring in the price of piping has gone up 30%. Is that correct, Mr. Kitlis?
Yeah.
So we're always in this constant like playing catch up. We think we're moving ahead, but we're actually falling further behind. So
And that's why I chose like the average say was 8 cents. I choose 10. You choose 12 cents. So at least you're higher than the average, trying to keep up with inflation at least, and keep up with the rising costs. As an option, or looking at it every year.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a huge challenge because I have to pay these bills too. I don't want to pay more, but I also know that we're going to be starting to get ourselves into a situation here. And I look at our reservoirs, right? We've talked about the need for another reservoir. And better pressure in some of our neighborhoods and the Tiffin booster station and all these different things, and those have very pricey price tags on them. So Councilor Moore, you haven't said anything. Would you like to jump in with any comments?
Well, yeah, I know we have a lot of workers in town now who are drawing on the water supply. It's good to see the workers here, but it's just a fact that our water is probably going faster than it has before. And I always think about a major fire or something and how much that depletes the reservoir. If that should happen, that probably will happen one day, but that's just one of the worries. But I agree that we should keep up with costs, and supply and demand costs aren't going to get any better in the next little while. So that'll just add to it all.
Anyway, I leave that with administration see what you come up with. I certainly understand the wanting to wait until next year, but we're already increasing the rates, so another 3 or 4 cents, like. It's like the 4.6 and 4.9 at the end of the day, it doesn't, to the average person, that change doesn't make a big difference to their bill per se necessarily, but it makes a huge impact to how it impacts us as a municipality. So, Ms. Beveridge?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to note that there is an opportunity, you know, as far as a utility rate model where you charge a flat fee to accommodate some of this that you're speaking of, just as far as when we're looking at future infrastructure needs for the municipality. So it's something that we would have to do some research on and build a proposal for it. But it would take more time than just a quick response, but it is something that is possible.
To the mayor's CEO beverage, are you saying that it would be like a $2 surcharge? Like, I know lots of different models, I get you, like, and just trying to.
There's flexibility.
Flexibility.
Yeah, I like, if you look at this here, 495 in Drayton, we're at 298. 290 is Whiteport. I don't know what their model is. We're at 298, so we're right in the ballpark. 314 in Rocky, 677 in Stony Plain. You know, we're very competitive.
Another, sorry, and go like what you're saying is going. You want to 151, so that would be essentially about another $130 on my math. If you go to your next slide about what the cost per house would be, it would be about another $130. My math is correct.
$1.29.
Sure.
Another 4 cents per cubic meter, so 4 times. So great, yeah, you'd be at $30.20, right?
Yeah.
So you're asking for another 80 cents. So, Councillor Barr.
Yeah, through the chair to council and administration, you know, I know it sucks to have a fee increase, but it also, you know, would maybe make people consider that we also do need to reduce our water usage. There are lots of opportunities, and the town has been putting it out in utility bills for years, you know, not watering your lawns and low flush toilets, and there's all sorts of things. And you know, if that makes people push, then that's good too, right? You know, having less water being used is helpful to us as well.
Yeah.
So, and right now we have a stormwater management $2 fee on our bill. So I'm not sure if that's what CEO Beveridge was referring to, is having maybe looking into a I don't know, water infrastructure line that kind of went towards the capital portion of trying to, you know, drill wells and put pipe in the ground, I guess. Then yeah, I'd be supportive of hearing something like that.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Moore.
I just wanted to make a little observation. I know when people buy bottled water, they don't think very much about it, but when you look at our water rates, still it would be a bargain compared to bottled water. So,
Yeah, people buy a lot of bottled water for $75 best.
Looking at the increase in cost, I would support what Mayor Zahara is saying if we want to look at that change. But I'd also hear what CEO Beveridge says. I'd strongly recommend to administration we look at a longer term permanent fix attached to the utility bills, and it's planning for the future and not just doing this willy-nilly every year in response to things we've already planned for. So it's my 2 cents.
So you don't want to go up 2 cents, perfect.
Well said. Well said.
Like 49, said about 51.
All right. Sorry about that, Miss Bittner. I kind of went on a tangent, but
That's okay. Are we ready to?
yes.
We're all still here.
I'm fighting for the water utilities department.
We're all still here.
Okay, so moving on from utilities. So we have some other expense adjustments. Again, the external, obviously, it talks about the external utility impacts of electricity and gas. So there's a net increase there of 101, and insurance came down by 15. Again, the personnel, the net increase of 44.9, and the other head cost sharing changes with another net increase of 15. That excludes the landfill. These are the ones for all the other areas that are cost shared with the county, all put together. So any questions on those?
Councilor Moore?
Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. It is interesting to see we had a decrease in insurance, so a lot of times that you don't see that.
Yes, Councillor Moore, we had done an estimate for interim budget, because other years we had waited till we got the final and had to bring it back, and it was always an increase. So for interim, we decided, oh, we're going to do a bit of an estimate. We overestimated slightly for interim budget.
So the sort of the decrease is from interim, not necessarily from last year.
That's
right?
correct. These are changes from interim to final. Yes. So also there's the Edson Senior Transportation Society with the addition of the 34.5 as per council resolution earlier this year. It's the Wilmore Park caretaking agreement. The caretaking was recently subject to an open competition, and I only had one proposal that was received. However, administration believes that the proponent will add significant value to the site and be a wonderful community partner. Once that agreement is signed, we'll be able to share with you the proponent that was successful. There's some airport coverage there, around 15,000. It's one of those areas, as I mentioned earlier, where just looking at historical actuals are always above the budget, so we're just trying to realign that budget to be more realistic. A contribution of 5,000 to the golf tournament, and then the other minor adjustments amongst all the other areas came to around $12,000. So they're the adjustments for the expenses from interim to final. Any questions on this slide?
Council, any questions?
Okay. So those are revenue adjustments. You probably recognise these as the ones that were spoken about for our fees review. So just showing that they have been included in the final budget as discussed earlier at the committee meeting when we brought that forward to you. So now with our reserve transfers, as mentioned, the public health rent transfer removed from interim to final, and our reliance on that energy reserve for COVID recovery also has been removed. Now with the revenue sharing operational contribution. So in the past, the contribution we received from the revenue sharing agreement, the RSA, has always been transferred in its entirety to a capital reserve. However, we're proposing that an amount be left within the operational budget, as operation is an area that should really also be benefiting from this agreement. So we're proposing around about $500,000, actually not about, $500,000 to be left within the operational budget on a yearly basis. This year we're just sort of showing where the offsets can be. For example, 354,000 of that would offset the cost of 3 CMP offices, and with 146 just being as a general taxation offset. So that was the sort of proposed, just re-looking at the use of the RSA agreement as part of that. Really, there's an argument for that it is an operation should be an area benefiting from that.
Any questions, comments, or concerns? Yeah, when we first developed the revenue sharing agreement, part of that was understanding that there's development that's happening outside our borders that we're benefiting from that. And that would help us, I guess, right, what I'm looking for here is close the gap on the tax difference between the two, and our taxes paid for operations, obviously. So, and I think this is also good because while this is revenue from the county, the policing is a general area that is actually supporting the county as well. So I certainly support that, and obviously policing is becoming a larger item for us as part of our operational costs. Councilor Sharp?
So what you're proposing is we take 500,000 from a revenue sharing, putting into budget, kind of a double-edged sword. If we leave it in savings, what we talked about earlier, water, that's money to pay for that. But I'll also look too, if we took 500,000 from operating, our 4.5 tax increase would be similar. So, I mean, taking 500,000 makes perfect sense, because we are using money that was gave for us, to operate our town. So we are still saving, because the mistake was made before. We took all the money and put it into budget. We had no savings. So it wouldn't be, I would be in agreement that we look at taking that 500,000, because we're taking from reserves to offset taxes. That would be a smart thing. That makes sense to me. So I would definitely look at that idea.
Councilor Barr?
To the chair, to council and administration, I'm a little torn over this. I do understand the point that you're trying to make, that the operation should be benefiting from that agreement. I'm challenged because our operations not already benefiting from the 35-65 agreements that we have in the facilities.
Yes, through to Councillor By. For the areas that we do cost share, yes, there is either 35-65 or similar, very close cost sharing just for those areas though. But if you think about, for example, road maintenance, things like that, the county people do drive on them. So that's just one example on some of those things that this could actually help as taxation offset for. Just the fact that the county do use the town. Right?
And the revenue sharing has
All the
always
areas of
been
town.
for those ancillary items that we don't have agreements for, things like trails or some of those smaller items. So, CO Beverage.
Mr. Mayor, through Councilor Mayor, sorry. What I think, we took a look at this with a different set of eyes, I suppose. A different viewpoint when we looked at the benefit that this allows us. The policing definitely does go out to the county often, and as Ms. Bittner mentioned, the roads is something that where we really looked at as far as the wear and tear on our roads, where utilizing our roads to get to where they need to go. They may live in our community, but they're going out to potentially work in the county, et cetera, and vice versa. So it was just a way to look at this a little bit differently and use it more as cash versus being a reserve in that sense. So we looked at managing it, and the 500,000 was reasonable in our view as far as the operational, and there might be other strategies that we come forward with really setting aside what this money is used for. You'll often see this money coming forward for projects that when we need money in essence. So it was just a different approach to it, and just assigning it to an area, and it may change over time.
Okay, thank you.
I would just say that I think it would be a big mistake to put it all towards operating. I think this is a good number, so that if there are changes with that agreement, it's not going to upset the apple cart per se. And I think that finding that happy medium is important. But to have a reserve there of $5 million and you're struggling to fund your operations, I think kind of defeats the purpose, as well as why this agreement came together between the two partners.
Right. So all the amendments that you've seen previous to this bring the budget to the 4.52 increase that's been presented this evening. Past here, I'm going to move on to some of those adjustments that don't actually affect taxation but still need to be within the budget. So yes, I say while they have no impact on tax, they still need to be approved within the operating budget. And there are items such as those carryover items that we had from 2021 due to supply chain issues. We set up the carryover reserve so that we were funding that from 2021's taxation but only just being spent in 2022. Some reserve funded items. These are projects that either were not completed in 2021 or additional items approved by council since interim that were funded from a reserve. And also some grant funded items. Again, if they weren't completed in 2021, we must carry them over. Or some new grants that may have been secured since the interim budget. So with the carryover items, these were the ones that were set aside in 2021. The money was set aside, sorry, at the end of 2021 because we hadn't received them yet. So there was some workstation replacements and part supplies for public works, wastewater treatment plant, some columbarium plaques, some energy projects, and there was a little recreation hall within recreation as well. So they've been included in this budget also. Some of the reserve funded items, there was a 30,000 columbarium repair that was approved by council in January, and the chambers AV upgrade that was approved just a week ago. Also, the pool is due for some grouting this year. The fire hall AV needs an upgrade. Yes, they've been working on an old smart board that I think's reached its end of life.
That's why you had us do our training session. I understand.
There's an asset retirement obligation study. You'll also hear a little bit more about this from our auditors when they present to you next week. It's an area where within the public sector accounting board, or PSAB, if you hear me say that, there's an area where we now must look at all of our assets, like we do with the landfill. Once that asset is used, we need to reclaim it. There's money involved with that. So it's now looking at all of our assets and seeing whether when they're at end of life, we need to have some money set aside to retire those assets. It will be things like in any of our buildings that have asbestos in them, for an example. So those sorts of things haven't really been looked at, but they are due to be, have to be in with our books at the end of 2022. The engineering standards brought forward as well. There was a disaster training exercise which sort of put off until the beginning of the year. And then there were some benches that were purchased with the Eddie's Big Run Reserve. We just need to be installed. So that's what that those amounts there. With our grant funded items, Griffiths Park had a lighting completion, just a tiny little bit more to do that didn't get finished in 2021. They've also secured a grant for accessibility for the Griffiths Park complex as well, of $93,000. There's also a New Horizons program. It's a program for technology for seniors and training, etc. And also the completion of the Citywide Works program. May have heard it called Maintenance Manager. It's got a few different names, but this is the one where it's a program where we can link our work orders for our assets into the asset management plan. So it links it through. So we just have to need a little bit more spent on that for the completion of that program. So they're the items that are also included in the final budget brought over from 2021. So
Just a question, maybe Mr. Beck might be best to answer this. So the Griffiths Park complex site completion, that's for the building itself. That hasn't to do with any lighting at the basketball hoops or at the dog park.
That's right, Mr. Mayor. This is all the building itself, that building project.
One of the items that I brought up a few times, last budget, the budget before that, is a need for lighting at our basketball courts there, as well as the dog park. Do we have any money in the budget for that this year? If not, can we add it, paying for it through maybe the energy reserve or something? We have a lot of kids in our community that like to play basketball. They like to do so at night. They're often there with their vehicles. And I think they're doing a positive activity in our community. I don't care what time of day or night it is. That'd be nice that they would have a lit up area to do that. It's a widely used, they're playing ball there anyway, except they're trying to do it in the dark. And later at certain times of the year it gets dark pretty early. And same thing at the dog park. People like to take their dogs later in the evening. They might work late shifts or whatever. I know that the dog park over there was pilot and it seems to be working well, so. And I've talked to people about maybe moving the lights over from the old park to the new park, and I still know the old one's still used as well. Some people prefer that area depending on their dogs, so. I don't know if there's a possibility of looking at that. Or if council objects at all to that.
More lights, I can play basketball in the dark.
Councillor Taylor, and it aligns with their strat plan as well.
It does, and supportive of it. Just curious, the money in the energy reserve, I thought we were looking maybe at trying to ground some lighting at by Mary Bergeron School. Was that something that we were looking at, or?
We did talk about one point in one of our sessions about underground reel around Mary Bergeron. That was an area that was planned to be done with the school going in and got missed or didn't happen because we started using that fund for something else. But I think that's a much larger project.
I don't know how much we have in the reserve.
We have $1 million at the end of this year. So I'll leave that with them in. Just add it to your list.
So this is an extra slide that I've added since you were one on the agenda. So there's some taxation impacts, the differences from 2021 to this budget that's been presented this evening. Yeah, so you can see for residential and non-residential, just picked a few different assessment amounts. For residential, 100,000, 250, 350, or 500,000, and just the differences between 21 and 22 for the municipal, the school, and the evergreens, and then obviously the totals at the end. So you can see that that's the difference per year for those assessments.
Oh, there. 109.
That's actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
You'll notice with the school, there's been a reduction.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the requisitions.
Thank you, provincial government.
We'll talk about the requisitions in the next.
So the total will be 109.80 difference.
On a $500,000 house.
So, yeah, I know that you live in.
So my residential and non-residential.
So we typically use 350 as the average assessed home in our community. So the average ratepayer on the municipal side, because we don't control the other two, we'll be looking at $61.43. Yeah, I thought that was going to be.
This is very helpful in terms of seeing the big, of course, the thing to consider is that is sort of the average. Some homes might be infinitely more, correct? Depending on your assessment.
Depending on the assessment, yeah. So I thought we're trying to get a range.
We've seen when Compass was here that most assessments didn't really change that drastically, so.
And that concludes the presentation for the operating budget.
All right, any questions on that? I commend administration, everybody who worked on this. We've been hit with a couple big things since interim budget and we still managed to reduce it. Great work to everybody involved in that. Questions, comments? Councillor Taylor.
From the mayor to Min, thank you for your work on this. I know when we started in November, and of course, Councillor Moore and I are brand new, and first thing you get thrust into is budget, and you know, I'm a drama teacher, so math is not my forte, right? I'm good at drama though, right? Anyways,
He's not wearing sparkling.
Fast forward now 6 months under our belt, understanding it better, but the world has changed, like drastically. One of those hits, and I don't know if anyone brought it up, was about electricity. I don't know if that anyone brought that up tonight already. But I think we also need as a council to take a stronger advocacy voice in voicing for our residents and voicing for this organization. You know, so many people in our community, province, are stretched thin with the inflation, with the gas prices, insurance, groceries, and now electricity costs on top of that. We don't control obviously any of that, but we can be the voice to, and I think that, I know we've been part of group letters and things like that, but we need to speak that we are being hit by these electricity costs, and all we do is just pass it on to the residents. And that's, I think we need to be the voice, we need to be a stronger voice, lobbying voice to say something has to change. Because we can't be continually being hit by this. Something has to change, something has to stop. So going back to this budget though, and as I talked about that lobbying role, I was torn coming into this, knowing that we were at 4.9 and the world had changed, and now we were looking at 4.5, and whether or not any increase further was necessary. Would that solve any of our problems? And we heard tonight a 1% increase is $114,000. Does $114,000 solve all the issues and challenges that this organization has, that our municipality has? It really doesn't. I think we have greater challenges than just that. So I think I'm happy with what is being presented, and happy with the work that's been done. I want to thank him again for I want to call it nickel and dime. I don't think nickel and dime, but it's, for your hard work to get to where we are, so it's as manageable as possible for our residents, knowing what they already being hit. So it's my comments.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other comments, concerns? Like tonight. And in actual fact, if we go back and look at what our historical budget was prior to the 5% decrease, we're actually looking at a 2.62 if we didn't have that COVID piece that we were trying to catch up on. So it's not this is where it gets a little complex. It's not necessarily a true 4.5% in context of what our budget was prior to that 5% decrease. People are going to see 4.5 and they're going to go, oh my God, you're so far out of line of where everybody else is. We're actually right in line with everybody else. A lot of municipalities didn't do a decrease. This municipality did a 5% decrease, and I don't think we ever got credit for doing that. Nor should we. We're here to make those tough decisions. So I think when you take all the information to account, I think that we're in a reasonable place. Nobody's happy. I'm never happy to have to raise taxes, but with all the headwinds that we're facing here, I think that we're in a good position. But I know that our ship is tight, and we don't have a lot of room for things on the operational side. Councillor Byron.
Thanks, through the chair to council and administration. So there are a few more things on the agenda. I do have some further comments regarding our increase, but I'll prefer to wait until the other items are presented.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, just getting this one up again. Trying not to call Steve.
See, just behind you.
Oh, here it is.
Come on, Daniel, you can do it.
See, it comes out. Yeah, it is. I'm so sorry. The mouse is just. I don't
Should
think you
blame
can-
the
I don't know
mouse.
if you can fix it.
Steve's a good guy. You can have him up there, right?
Use this.
But even that. it's a little bit
This isn't
strange.
working either. Are you kidding me?
Do you guys want to get a refill of your drinks? Washroom break, 5 minutes? Recess for 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
So sorry.
All right, we're back, we're live, we're good. Thank you for that recess. We are moving on, so we did the requisitions piece, did we not? Are we on
Not yet.
COVID strategy? Not yet, okay, requisitions.
Sorry, fast. To start, this is a very fast piece. Literally just one slide to show you. I just thought I'd bring, talk about the requisitions in as a little separate piece for new people on council and just a bit of a refresh. So these amounts are not known until early in the year. So that's why we never really addressed them at the time of the interim budget. They're billed directly to the town and we must collect them within the taxation process. We have no control over the amount. We are given the amount that we must collect, and then the assessment we have drives whatever mill rate we need for that. The council, you have no say in that. So there are 3 we collect. There's an education property tax, which is collected on behalf of the government of Alberta, and that goes towards both public and separate schools, the Catholic system. There's something called a designated industrial property tax. This is a new one with the last couple of years. It's collected on behalf of the government of Alberta again for the administration of their centralised assessment of linear property. So it only gets applied to our linear property assessment. And then our seniors requisition is for the Evergreens Foundation, is what we collect that for and pay directly to them as well. They requisition us and we pay directly to them. So that's, I mean, this, I'll stop sharing this slide because it's really the only slide I have for that. Within your agenda, there was a little bit of more information on the requisitions for 2022. The school is very similar to last year. However, they have notified us that they haven't finalised their school requisitions for this year. But we won't know that in time for our taxation. But what happens there is then if they turn around later in the year and say it's gone up, we then have to collect that next year. So it's just a revolving thing where we have to always reconcile it at the end of the year. And anything we didn't collect, we have to collect the next year. So the DIP requisition went up like it says 17%, but it's very minuscule on our budget. There's really not a lot of it, $6,500. So Evergreens Foundation, there were some increases for operations and capital. I believe we attached the letters to your agendas for you to read, as well about the increases for Evergreens. So I'll just leave that for questions.
All right. Council, any questions on this one?
So next thing we have is COVID recovery strategies. Okay.
We're not taking another break.
Daniel to the rescue this time. Right. So with our COVID recovery strategies, a little bit of background very quickly. In 2020, we passed our emergency budget to assist some of the burdens of the pandemic with a just over 5% taxation decrease. At that time, administration had brought forward a 5 to 6 year plan to recover from that the taxation lost in that year. But it doesn't require increases to taxes for those years to recover. So the question is, do we continue along the 5 to 6 year path, or is there another way? Just a quick recap again here. This was an interim budget. You can see on the taxation impact line there, the 0.06 that we spoke about earlier for 2022. Our reliance on the energy reserve actually increased based on what we were using for the interim budget. So what that would mean for that 5 or 6 year plan moving out from 2022 would be using nearly $1.4 million of reserves to get us through our COVID recovery. That was at the interim budget. But budget presented tonight, you can see the energy reserve no longer has any reliance on there. It's just the most grant and the COVID relief, bringing up that 1.9% towards our COVID recovery, as I say, eliminating reliance on energy reserve. The reserves now to be used over that same yearly span of 5-6 years is 855,000, with a reduction of 541 from interim. So now those reserves are now free to be used and allocated to other projects, etc. But is there another way? So come up with a couple of different strategies just to show you as an examples of how we could do this. So scenario 1 is an all-in approach. We decide that this year we're going to get rid of our COVID recovery all in one go. It would require 5.19% towards COVID recovery, which means our tax increase would equal 7.81%. Eliminates reliance on all the reserves. We're not using any of that 1.4, and those reserves are now free to be used to go towards other projects. So that's the all-in aggressive, let's get it done, all-in approach. Another one that we looked at was a 50-50 approach. So if we looked at 2022, you'll see there it would be a 2.6% towards COVID recovery. So the tax increase would equal a 5.22. It eliminates reliance on the energy reserve and also a portion of the COVID relief reserve. Brings down any reserves we use from this year onwards to only 295,000, with a saving from the interim of $1.1 million in reserves that are now freed up. So they were the so just a couple of scenarios that we gave. I've also added another slide to this particular presentation as well from the one in your agenda, just to go through some comparison of the taxation impacts from the difference from 21. So I've done the underneath the 4.52 and the two scenarios are the yearly impact. I've done it per month because some people do pay their taxes on PAP, so there could be some information that could be helpful there as well. So using that same assessment, those are the same assessment spans that I showed you for taxation. You can see that scenario 1 would be an increase from 2021 on a $350,000 house of about $10.88 a month, or $130 for the year. Scenario 2, about $6.35 a month and $76 a year for an average $350 assessment. So that's just our quick presentation there on some other COVID strategies that we could look at.
All right, thank you, Councillor Bonner.
Thanks, to the chair, to council and administration. So this is something that I had given a lot of thought since our November interim budget that we had, and it's with a lot of reflection over the past couple of years, and things kind of maybe simmering a little bit in our day-to-day life. I was really struggling with the thought of using all of those reserves to decrease taxation over the next several years. And I truly feel that will it will make it very challenging to do some of the things that we want to do in our strategic plan. We just saw it an hour and a half ago, and or so, and it looks fantastic. But it does require some funding, and it requires the use of some reserves and money from anywhere we can get it, really. And so I was really struggling with that. And I am pleased to see that there are some other options brought forward, because everything we do has trade-offs. And, and I'm very nervous that if we continue along the path that is originally set, that there will be trade-offs that we won't really quite understand right now. I I personally feel that the scenario one is the way to go. There is another municipality in our region, 2 hours away, who did the exact same thing we did. They did that 5% tax decrease. And now this year they're making up for it because I don't think they have reserves. I'm not sure what they did, but they're facing a 12.9% tax increase in order to refund their operations essentially, along with the other policing and electricity costs that they're likely facing along with us. So the way I see the scenario one presented, I think that is very reasonable considering what we've done over the past couple of years. And that would be my recommendation to council, that we go in that direction. As we can see on the chart here, the current tax increase per month on the average, say $350,000 residential home is $5 a month. That's less than my home internet went up this month. So, so it's
Under the current model, but if we go to scenario one, it'll be 1088.
right, exactly. So, and even at the 1088, that's still the case.
Yeah.
So, it feels like municipalities are always the one that has to take that hit. Oh, they should never increase, but everybody else increases around us. And somehow we're in the position where we have to just kind of just take it from all angles. And we can't, we owe it to the people living in Edson today that we can get our financial situation under control, as well as everybody in the future. If we had an extra $855,000, I don't know where best that can go, but I'm sure there's a list a mile long. So it's, after kind of defunding our taxation and our town, we need to refund it if we want to have sustainability, in my opinion. So it would be my recommendation that we make an adjustment and go with the scenario one option that's been presented.
All right, Councillor Dwyer. Councillor Chouinard.
I disagree. No, but I agree because we have to recover. What we talked about earlier, the 500,000 from our cost sharing agreement. So I disagree, but I agree with Councillor Dwyer. We have to play catch up, but going 10% now would be like, scenario one would, if I'm doing the math right, it would go up an extra up to 7.8 or 5.6 on top of what we're going now.
The tax increase would be 7.8. That includes COVID recovery and operations.
Okay, so right now on the path are 4.5, we are relying on subsidized, correct?
Yes, the 4.5 has 1.9% of COVID recovery.
And 1.9 is approximately about 200,000 then, 1.9%?
375,000.
Okay, so 375, so if we're gonna pay it back and we're thinking about taking 500,000 from our cost sharing agreement to fund the projects, it's the same thing, we have to take from here or there, but we have to catch up. So we did go to 4, so I wouldn't want to see go 5 and 6 in the first year. So this year we're going 4.5, that offsets what we went backwards for 5%. So we need to maybe look at some of the other money to catch, because if you're proposing all in, we're going to 7.8 total tax increase.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
That would clear our COVID recovery altogether and save us almost 1.4 million in reserves.
Yes, that would, but then we're still taxing more. I would be more in favor of the 50/50s, breaking it over 2 years rather than 1 year. Then we're looking at 5.2, something more reasonable. And if we need money, we already said the 500,000. It's not as if we don't have money in savings account or an emergency situation. So I would go with scenario 2, 50/50.
Thank you, Councillor Chouinard. Anybody else? Councillor Moore.
Through the chair to administration, maybe I'm missing something. What does MOST stand for?
So the most is money that was provided by the provincial government for COVID relief. So it stands for the Municipal Operating Sustainability Transfer. So this came about after council decided to reduce taxes by 5%. So this was additional money that was given to us on top of the 5% reduction. So the COVID relief fund that you see there, that's money that we saved from the reduction, which came with, for the new members of council, came with some pain to this organization and our employees. And then we got the most. So municipalities were free to do whatever they want with that money, basically, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's what that stands for. Thank you. Councillor Barnaby.
Through the chair to council and administration. So good point, Councillor Moore, bringing up the most grant. If we hadn't done anything, we would have ended up just using that instead of having a 5% tax decrease, from my perspective. But we acted quickly. So we acted very quickly because we knew that businesses were struggling. We knew people were struggling. There were so many unknowns, and none of the other multi-government grants or helps to other businesses and residents were out yet. And this, from my perspective, can be used back up by getting us back to where those other municipalities are that didn't decrease that 5%, right? If another municipality is only doing a 2.5% increase, it's maybe because maybe they didn't do a 5% tax decrease a couple of years ago, right? The municipality I'm referring to that has the 12.9% tax increase this year did the exact same thing we did, and they're trying to recover this year in one shot. So I am so happy to see only a 7.81% tax increase would get us out of that scenario. I think that's absolutely amazing, and it would maybe give us a little breathing room, so we can start using the other money for projects that would be of substance.
And just when we talk about the 5, it was actually more than 5% because there was an inflationary piece in there too.
Yes.
On top of that.
Yes.
So yeah. Anybody else want to jump in? Councillor Taylor.
I struggle with this. And I alluded to this earlier, is that, many people don't, they only have so much to give. And, we're trying to make it manageable for them because there are so many other factors that aren't manageable for them. We toured the food bank not too long ago. And, the numbers are rising there, and I can only imagine it's going to get worse. So what can we do on our end to reduce that? And I understand our responsibility to ensure that this organization is sustainable. And I would love if we could, in one foul swoop, and yes, we can, eliminate, what we did with the 5% decrease a few years ago. But the hit to some residents would be substantial. If honestly, if we weren't dealing with different inflationary issues in today's world, the price of gas, the price of groceries, and the price of insurance, then this may be a much, much easier decision. I just, someone is earlier, I think it was the mayor that said a few meetings ago that administration, you bring us scenarios and we put the political lens on this. And the political lens on that is pretty rough. And it's pretty hard to sell to that single mom who's working that job with 2 kids and is already struggling for a grocery store.
That's me.
Yeah, that is you, right? And or the single dad,
Just off your grade.
right? But it is and I think, but I still stand by what I say, right? That I think that if we didn't have those other things to consider, if the world was a little different, I think I would be more in favor of what Councillor Byer's saying, but I just. I can't honestly do that at this time.
Ms. Bittner?
Just to bring you back to the scenario we have at the moment, if you look at the taxation impact, those amounts going out for the next 4 years are going to have to be added, just like the 1.9's been added for each of those years as well. So and I know what you're saying, Councillor Taylor, there's that impact as well, that to get out of this, if we extend it further, then that's more reserves we use to get past this as well, just as a reminder.
Yeah, so many thoughts on this myself. I'd like to rip the Band-Aid off and just we are not in a place where we normally would be right now. The residents of Edson, the business of Edson have been paying less tax than they would have pre-COVID because we did that decrease and we never went back to that. We've been slowly increasing it because that was part of our plan, because we did not know the impacts of COVID. None of us, I don't think at that time ever dreamed that we still would be talking now about what, a sixth wave, and we don't know what 6 months from now looks like. Nobody thought we'd be in another war. So it's a huge struggle for me. Because when we talk about that 7.8%, it's not a true 7.8%. It's actually 7.8% minus 5.1. I'm doing Gene Chouinard math here. Because when we talk about tax increases, we're talking about the increase of how much it's costing our operations from a year-to-year basis, usually normal times, and that would be the 2 point. I'm sorry, again, really confusing here. The 5% is just what we're talking about here, is just to get us back to where we normally would be. It's not that we're adding a whole bunch of expenses. It's trying to save our reserves. I also know that as a municipality, as the town of Edson, we're facing a $500,000 RCMP bill in retroactive costs that we have not accounted for, folks. Where's that money coming from? Well, that's going to come from a reserve someplace, so we can't pave a street, so we can't fix a water line. And I'm not confident that the federal government, the budget just came out, there was no mention of any assistance there at all. And it might be buried in a line item somewhere. So then what do we do? We're in the same situation. Now we have to find $500,000. Well, we have $500,000 right here if we just rip the Band-Aid off. But at the same time, I hear Councillor Taylor, like the cost of everything. And everybody looks at us as a municipality and says, hey, you guys, you spend this and you're doing that. Well, we got to keep the lights on. You want the fire department to respond. You want the water to run. And you want the RCMP. Those are all costs that we get hit with, on top of all the downloading that we've had to absorb over the years. But that so like I'm completely torn. I certainly could accept scenario 2, but I have to admit scenario 1 is a hard pill for me to to swallow right now. Even though I would say quite clearly scenario 1 is the best decision without that political lens put on it. And I do appreciate administration bringing that to us. The responsible decision, the non-political decision, would to be say scenario 1, we're doing it because that's what needs to be done. But I'm a politician. I'm an elected representative of this community that has to think about, you know, those people that are struggling, those seniors that are on fixed incomes, the grandmother that's living in a basement with oil field workers, because that's all she can afford right now. True story in our community. So we have a tough job here, so. If it comes back, or if administration brings a request for decision next week for a scenario 2, I would support that. I would be hard pressed for scenario 1. Even though I think that is the right decision for this community for the long-term financial viability of Edson. Councilor Taylor.
I look at scenario 2 as well, and perhaps that's a better fix. And I do hear what Mayor Harrison, and I do hear what Councillor Byers trying to say. It's just get it done right now. I like, if the world was different, then I would be in favor of that. But maybe scenario 2 is something that can be managed, and again, we look at the numbers of what it would equate to. I'm deeply torn, and I think I don't know about others, whether or not we ever think what would we do, and as Councillor Byer alluded to it, if we knew that most grant was there, that different decision would have been made, and we would be suffering differently. We can't change the past, so I would look more favorably at scenario 2. I cannot support scenario, I don't think.
All right. Councilor Moore.
Well, yeah, these are tough times, and we may have to go with scenario 2, considering all the hardships that we have right now.
Councilor Sharma, how do you feel about scenario 2? I know you've.
Yeah, scenario 2, I think, is the best one. I mean, like, exactly, scenario 1 would be nice too, but it's hard to beat the argument in the room. Scenario 2 is the best one to go with.
How do you feel about scenario 2, Councilor Byer?
I personally feel that it's kicking the can down the road a little bit. I know it's just a year, but every year that I've been on council, there's been emergencies and new things have come up that cost a lot of money, way more money than I would ever expect, and emergencies that I never anticipated. This is, if we were to go back to 2019, and this is, what did we say, a 2.7% tax increase? Is that right?
2.62.
No, sorry, I'm just talking, if we went with scenario 1, the 7.8 minus 5.1 is 2.7. So going with scenario 1 is like the equivalent of a 2.7% tax increase, which didn't seem to be too challenging in prior years, and also still doesn't account for inflation. I really struggle with putting it over 2 years, even that way. I understand the political lens on it. Yeah, I'm that single parent with 2 kids working 2 jobs. I get it. And I have that $350,000 house that, so that's $10 a month. So what is that a day? Like,
yeah,
it's $1 a day. It's not the biggest inflationary increase that everybody is receiving. I know everything has gone up. Just went grocery shopping today. But we can't always be the ones having to suck it up for everybody else. Everything else goes up, and then we say, oh, okay, all right, then we won't. Because people can yell at us and they can't yell at their communications operator, whoever they have the phone plan to, right? They don't go too far there. So they pick us. But we have a responsibility too, to the current and future people of the community. And I think this is the right way to go with scenario 1, is getting back on track. It will take years to actually recover from COVID. I don't think that will ever happen in the sense that what we know it, because we still haven't accounted for that inflationary piece in there at all. And we are planning to use a reserve that we weren't using before, right? So there is still financial, we have, I guess, less financial resources, I guess, because we're allocating some money through the revenue sharing agreement towards operations, which wasn't being done before. So now we won't be able to, which I can agree with that. I can understand that reason. But it also means other projects down the road won't get done, right? And I was expecting a much larger one at 7.8, I think is reasonable. Yeah, the Band-Aid will hurt, absolutely. But it'll hurt a lot next year too. We don't know what will happen next year. Maybe next year we don't have to have as big of an increase. Maybe inflation will have changed, right? Maybe they'll get a break. I don't know. Or maybe inflation will increase even more.
Councillor Schmidt.
Just to refresh my memory, what was the total of that mouse grant, or most grant, I should say? Because if that was made for it and we're basically depleting that grant at 340, we're using what it's made for.
No, it wasn't made for reducing tax, it was.
No,
for
but it was a
maintaining
COVID,
operations.
but it was a COVID relief. And it's only there for now. And if we're using it for this indirectly, it's for COVID. The other thing I want to point out too, is we're saying at $10, but earlier in the night, we also said we're going to increase water, sewer. So people sitting, counting the money, saying this is 10, this is 5, pretty soon, and like Councillor Taylor said, grocery bills, gas bills, power bills. So the person counting the money was saying it's 10, pretty soon there's 10 tens, now it's $100 a month. So I think using up the most grant makes sense. That's what it was for. The 50-50 makes the most thing. I understand what Councillor Byer's saying, and the mayor. Really, when we do the math, do my kind of math, we went backwards 5 and then we went, so it's technically 2.7. So I could confuse someone on it and tell them really it's not 7, it's 2. But realistically, the easiest pill to swallow is 50-50, because we got to remember it's not just one thing in increasing.
Just to confirm, the total amount that was 856,993 for most.
And that was the total. So if we use all that to offset taxes, whatever it is, we're using it indirectly what it was made for, to help us get through COVID.
All right, Councillor, actually, can I just get a motion before I forget to extend the meeting time, please? Councillor Taylor, all those in favor? Motion carried, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Barnes.
Thanks. Through the chair to administration, how much since the beginning of COVID have we used to offset taxes total? It was just in 2021, it was almost 600,000, and
2020 was that the decrease year?
2020 was a decrease, yeah.
So 2020, we had the emergency budget. So 2021, we've used the 591. That's how much we've used so far to offset COVID recovery.
And then it's currently based on the budget you presented earlier at the 4.7.
It's another.
Then that's another
375.
375. So that's 6. That's almost $970,000 already that we've used, which is actually more than the most grant to offset taxes. Just for your information.
Basically 9%, well, 8 to 9%.
Yes.
Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
So, 2 comments, Mayor Zahara saying, take the political lens off, sooner than later is the best decision. It is. Second comment, you made Councillor Bayer had made comments about what a tax increase would have looked at in 2017 or 2018. The difference is the inflationary costs of everything else. And that's where I'm coming from in my decision. We turn back the clock 6 months. It's 6 months doing an interim budget. My decision might different, and I might side with you. But honestly, the changes we've seen, and I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to get worse. And I think, what, on paper says, well, it's only $10 a month or whatever, right? That $10 can go a long way, especially when you're on a fixed income. So I just, again, take the political lens off. Aaron's right. Sarah one is perfect. 6 months ago, it may have been, but.
Well, I think we've added this around enough. I think administration has some general direction of, are you gonna bring an RFD next week regarding the COVID? Based on the discussion here, I think you have heard general support for the 50-50 model. Man, yeah. The comment I was going to make, in 1 month, some people's utility bills in 1 month went up the same amount we're talking about for a year. Not even close, so depending on what your utilities were. And there's not a darn thing you could do about it as a ratepayer, as a utility customer. And you don't see any of that money back in our community. This is the work that we're doing here tonight. That's all going back into our community for our infrastructure, for our services, for the things that we provide in our community. And it's unfortunate these outside forces are causing so much havoc.
And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that we need to be a stronger advocate to the province, to the utility companies, that something needs to change. We cannot continue down this path.
With that, we're good. Do we need any more discussion on this item? Are you awake back there?
Mr. Mayor, I would just say, we brought forward, there were actually 3 scenarios if you.
Oh, is there a third one?
The first scenario, which we included with the budget, is conservative. It absolutely is. But there's a lot of factors that we considered and carefully considered. So
There was a third one.
we brought forward this for discussion, and we thank you for the healthy discussion in this, and we'll take that back.
And I'd like to remind everybody, and we do have 2 members of council that unfortunately are in other meetings out of town today, which will have potentially different perspectives. The great thing about municipal government is we try to find consensus and try to move forward on a reasonable approach, or an approach that everybody can agree with. So I do appreciate everybody's thoughts on this, because I think it's an important discussion to have. We have nothing. I think you're done, Sarah. Are you done?
Are you done?
Yeah.
Sorry, this guy trying to get out of here.
Motion for adjournment.
Nice try.
Well, if we would have had that extra committee home meeting, it's when we was on.
How many people we've watched online, Steve? That would be Steve.
That'd be Steve. I'm disappointed Trevor isn't watching us.
Capital budget.
Final capital budget. So the 2022 capital budget was passed November 25th, 2021. And since then, administration has conducted a full review, looking at items such as just things like anything that may have to be put off, and things that have been learnt, or things that may not be able to be completed this year, to just bring forward a more a capital budget to final that's more sort of comprehensive and achievable, I guess is a word that so. So some projects were reviewed to ensure their viability, originally forecast. There was some carryover budget amounts that have been updated, because at the time of interim we didn't quite know the 2021 expenses. And of course, there's anything that might have been added since November, and a couple of minor funding adjustments. And within your package, you have a color-coded sheet. I'll sort of run through those areas for you now. So there were some projects that have been removed since interim budget. One was the fire department and Yellowhead County Fire Department training tower. Just waiting a more formal agreement with Yellowhead County for the future capital expenditure on this item. Vision Park Phase 1 trails was actually completed in 2021. So obviously didn't have to go forward to 2022. Woolmore Park site plan and Lions Park plan, working on preferred concepts in the coming year, and we'll visit in a future budget. The highway beautification and feasibility design, again, needs to be better defined, and it's just not ready for this year's budget cycle. Bullseye Pond Dredge and Poplar Place Storm Channel, they can be done at a later date, with discussions with our capital projects manager. The degas well house, it may need to be redesigned as a result of anticipated regulatory changes. So we have deferred that to a future budget as well. So they're the items that have been removed since the interim budget. Some projects that would carry forward. Obviously, there's the multi-use facility, the Lost Creek design construction, the First Ave design, 40th Street design, Vivian Park well and washroom, receiving station, a wastewater treatment plant assessment, and of course our alternative water source exploration. So all the projects that were in the 2021 budget that need to be carried forward. There are a few items that have been added since the interim budget. One was the Glenwood Park upgrade. It was added following the approval of the grant application. Campground improvements. So while the site plans have been postponed, there are still some minor improvements that can be made to the campgrounds this year. So we're repurposing that budget into the actual campground improvements. Sewer camera equipment in the vehicle, it was inadvertently omitted from the interim budget that should have carried forward from 2021. And also the landfill scale upgrade was anticipated to be completed, but wasn't, so needs to be carried forward. So it wasn't on the interim budget, but it's now on the final budget. With some funding adjustments, the alternative water source exploration was originally funded from the gas tax. If you remember, late last year I had to come back, or early this year I had to come back, and so the gas tax funded didn't meet the requirements of that grant, and so we've switched that to being funded from a reserve. At that time, I said we would look through our projects and see if there was another one that would meet the gas tax. So it was a bit of a swap, and the Civic Centre boiler replacement fits the criteria for the gas tax fund. So that's just that little funding adjustment that we did. Yeah. So any questions on those items?
Council, any questions? Just on the highway beautification piece through the CAO beverage, and all this is a thing that we had a robust discussion on. Is there anything in plan operational wise to do a few things to kind of make things look a little nicer, maybe some color on our planters or something?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This was not, we've not forgotten this.
Okay.
We had a discussion with regards to this, and when we had originally talked about, we talked about to potentially locate some grants and opportunities there. And just to be fair, it just is one of those things we just didn't unfortunately get to and be able to provide or, add any detail towards. So it's something that we wanted to actually have a better handle on of what we actually wanted to achieve there. So
no. Okay.
So to be fair, with all of the.
Once again, priorities.
Mr. Mayor, I believe community development did apply for a grant for some potential murals.
Yes,
as
there is a
beautification, and
grant.
that's
That's
hopefully something that will be happening. So
some of those small things that potentially.
We are planting flowers this year, right? Better ask the question.
steal them from your garden.
Are they gonna be small
But yes,
flowers?
this
or
year,
are they
not
gonna
to the
be-
scale that we had originally talked about, quite that.
Gotta have a sense of humor today. Any other questions? So I'd just like to point out, and so we were talking about the alternative water source exploration, $235,000. But when you look at our water asset management plan, I know they're different, but we only have 177,000. So this is exactly what I'm talking about, where we need to have money for our current assets. We got do that work. And we're a long ways from where we need to be. We're certainly making progress, but. All right, I don't see anything else on capital. Councillor Schnard.
Just one actual quick question on some of these major projects, not tonight, but in the future, we'll get updates on the possible completion because some of them are held up for different reasons.
Yeah, I think we have scheduled for May 17th. Mr. Fisher's coming to do a capital projects update for council, so we have that penciled in to come and give some.
Okay. That was my only question on that. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Moore, you're okay? Good. All right.
So these next few slides just show you the final capital budget and the projects that are included within that. Bringing us to $32 million. Of course, that includes an approximation of 20 million for the multi-use facility. It's hard to know how much per year for that at the moment. So, right, so moving on, just here I have the proposed reserve balances. In your agenda package, there's a more robust projected reserves listing. It shows you what's being used per project, but just looking at just an overview here of the proposed reserve balances at the end of 2022.
Thank you. Land reserves. That's right. All right.
That concludes the budget.
Thank you, everyone, for that. We'll move on. No, nothing from community protective services, no information, no sundry items. Questions from media and public regarding items from this council meeting? Just one after 3 hours, really?
Yeah. Mayor Zahara, just want to confirm the 7.8% proposed in scenario one, that's from the 4.52, not the 4.99, right?
Now I gotta do my math here. Go ahead.
Yes, I would believe that would be correct, right? We're not moving from the interim, we're talking about from the original.
Yes, that would be what the final
Revised, yeah.
increase is,
Yeah.
including the COVID plus the operational part that was presented tonight too.
Okay, thank you.
We didn't confuse you with all those numbers we were throwing around.
We'll see how it translates.
Find out next week.
Now council approves a 40% increase. No. Thanks for sticking around. With that,
Motion for adjournment?
no, sorry, can I get a motion for intergovernmental affairs update for section 21, disclosure harmful to intergovernmental relations, and section 24, advice from officials, multiplex updates. Councillor Taylor, all those in favor?
Motion to adjourn.
Very good, Steve. All right, Councillor Shadar makes motion for adjournment. All those in favor? Motion carried. Have a good night.